Joey said I'm an electro-pollution consultant. I'll very briefly explain what that is. I go to people's homes and businesses and measure the levels of electro-pollution. So what is electro-pollution? What's classified as electro-pollution? So we actually have four basic kinds. The first is AC magnetic fields, or alternating current, and this is typically around high voltage power lines and the wiring in your house. And if you get high magnetic fields in your home, it means you've actually got a wiring fault generally. And the safe limit is, from my perspective, is less than 1 milligauss. The New Zealand standard is 2,000 milligauss. Okay, so, and what I'll measure underneath a high voltage power line is up to 25, 30 milligauss. So there's a very big disconnect between what's, and we'll talk about biologically active things a little bit later on. AC electric fields, and this is anywhere in the building wiring. If there's electrical voltage in the wiring, you'll get electric fields. And I'm finding more and more that people are quite badly affected by this. Microwave radiation, which is specifically, or more of what we're going to talk about tonight, that's really where Wi-Fi fits in. And it's, we'll look at it in a little bit more detail. Dirty electricity is the fourth kind of electropollutant, and that's transients and harmonics. It's a little bit hard to explain what that is, so I'll show you a little bit. This is some shots or some traces I took with my oscilloscope, and looking at the actual configuration of the waveform. The very top one, the red line, there's a little bit of spikiness on that, you see, and at the bottom is a spectrum analysis, which is looking at the frequencies. And the big thing is, when you have lots of dirty electricity, you get a lot more of these transient spikes, and the spectrum analysis brings in frequencies in a biologically active range. So that's really, I don't want to talk about that too much because I could do a whole evening just on dirty electricity, but we really want to look at something else. But you can see the difference between the two, and where you've got lots of these transients on the wiring, it can create a lot of ill health. Okay, so our planet, you know, what was it like 300 years ago? You know, we've evolved with these very, very low frequency DC electromagnetic fields, and the North and South Pole actually changes over every period of time, and it's due to change again at some stage in the future, fairly on the scale of things as far as the Earth is concerned. It's almost overdue, so let's hope it's not while we're around. And the natural frequency ranges for us biologically and the planet are roughly between 0 and 80 hertz, which is 80 cycles per second. And these waves, these extreme low frequency waves, are really big. They have a wavelength of like 6 kilometers or more. So this is really big, slow moving stuff, and this is what we biologically respond to. Lightning is in the 10 to 20,000 cycles per second, or 10 to 20 hertz. And there's a biologically harmful range between 1.7 kilohertz and 100 kilohertz, and this was discovered, I think, more by the Russians, and they seem to have a lot better understanding of the technology, and this was based on Russian weapons research, this frequency range. And the alternating current that we use for transmission of power is completely unnatural. We are DC beings. Our bodies are DC, and the Earth is a DC environment. And so where we have this alternating current, it's very, very unnatural to us as living beings and the planet. The top image is what the planet was like 300 years ago or so. So we had, on the left, we have the natural fields, a little bit of lightning, and a little bit of visible light, which is also an electromagnetic wave. And then the bottom image is what it looks like now. Now this was taken from a book published in about 1985, I think. And so I suspect, or I'm sure, that the height of those, amplitude of those bars would be a lot higher. We're really, really filling up our environment. And you can see how much we're filling up our environment with this microwave radiation. So what is it? Cell phones, Wi-Fi, cordless phones, smart meters, wireless baby monitors, and anything that transmits through the air. And I'm going to get a little bit technical here because I think it's a little bit important to understand what is biologically affecting us. And so we have a carrier signal, and then and for cell phones it's about 800 megahertz to 2.1 gigahertz, and Wi-Fi is typically 2.45 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz. And those, I know those numbers, I talk them very quickly and I'm used to them, and it's a little bit difficult, I think, to catch the full technical aspect of this, but I'll try to show you how this is affecting us a little bit in the next few slides. Okay, and the important part is not so much the carrier frequency, those frequencies I just sort of talked about. There is other frequencies built in or on top of those carrier frequencies. And so cell phone signals modulate at about 2 to 50 hertz. So that's between 2 and 50 times a second. And what we mean by modulation is that the very first part is the wave of the information we want to send. Then we have the carrier frequency, and this is what they call amplitude modulation, where the signal is placed on top of the carrier signal, and you can see how it affects the wave, and this changes the wave a little bit. And that 2 to 50 hertz is the frequency of that modulation. But not only do we have modulation, we also have pulses on this Wi-Fi and cell phone signal. And pulsing means that the signal is periodically interrupted, so it's actually shutting on and off. And especially in cell phones, that pulse frequency is 8.3 hertz and 1.736 kilohertz. And then on top of that, you can have up to 7 conversations or 7 connections to one channel on a cell phone tower. And so again, it's pulsed and split up, and we get another frequency at 217 hertz. And I know this is all getting a little bit much, but I'll get to another point in a minute. So 2.45 gigahertz is Wi-Fi, and there are 14 channels, so you can have 14 connections basically. And what we're seeing now is that there's a lot more higher frequency Wi-Fi coming in, 5.8 gigahertz. 2.45 was the standard open channel that you could have just about anything on. That's getting very crowded with cordless phones and all the other consumer devices that are going in there. Smart meters are going to be in that area too, to some degree. And so they've opened up a new frequency, 5.8, and this is can be a lot stronger, and it doesn't penetrate walls so well, but at low speeds it'll go a lot further. And 5.8 is going to become the predominant Wi-Fi frequency coming up fairly soon. And the pulse frequency of Wi-Fi is 10 to 100 hertz in standby, and 10 to 250 hertz when transmitting. And just as a bit of a comparison, individual neurons, that's the neurons in your brain, have frequencies between 100 and 350 hertz. And groups of neurons on the scalp have been measured at about 100 hertz. So, did you notice anything about that kind of stuff? The frequencies that I was sort of rattling off there are all in the biological range. They're either in the human biological range or the planetary biological range, or that biologically active range. And it's these modulations and pulses which seem to be the most active part that people respond really, really badly to. And this is what seems to be causing the damage to DNA and cell membranes, and we'll talk a little bit about that soon. And I guess one statement I'd make is that all organisms respond to these very, very unnatural frequencies, pulses and modulations. And I guess this is, I found this on the net the other day. I thought it was an interesting photo of just what, if you could see this stuff, what our cities may look like. And how long have we actually known about this? I mean, the government and the powers that be would have us believe that there's research happening right now, and it's all really new, and that it's all cutting edge stuff, and there is some really good cutting edge stuff. But in 1971, this guy, Dr. Zoran Glaser, worked for the US military, and he published this document, and there was 121 recognised biological effects of microwave radiation that they absolutely knew about this. This was published, peer-reviewed research in 1971. And I'm not going to say all those because there's far too many, but I think you start to get the idea of how long we've actually known about the stuff and the extent of the effect. And there's some fairly big things in there. Now, let's start talking about us as human beings and how we react to the stuff, and a little bit about our system. So we are very, very electric, and this is something that the modern mechanistic chemical medicine, in other words your doctor, doesn't really recognise. They'll measure your ECG and the EKG, they'll do a brain scan and they'll look at your heart, and they'll be measuring electric fields, but beyond that they really don't recognise that we're electric. It's all just chemical, and that is an ionic reaction. It's a chemical reaction with ions moving. So that's one aspect where we're electric. The other one is that we actually have a digital electrical system, and it's not in the nervous system, but it's on top of and near the nervous system in our bodies. And this is what transfers the information. And a guy, Dr. Robert Becker, was the main researcher who found a lot of this stuff out. And if you ever get a chance to read his books, one's Body Electric, Cross Currents, they are very, very interesting books on, and they're from the 80s, and it's what these guys were doing back then, and they were really, really onto it. The other thing that he found was that we actually have an analog electrical field, and that our brain and the main nervous or the nerves down our spine were had a negative potential, and the further you went out to the extremities, your hands and feet, we had a positive potential and voltage, and that meant that he had a theory that we would have this electromagnetic field around us, and it was almost 20 years until they actually developed a machine called a squid, I think it was called, that was sensitive enough to actually be able to measure this and actually verify that he was absolutely correct. And his theory based on that was that this very, very, very subtle electromagnetic field around us is how we react with the planet. How we are affected by the cycles of the moon, which is a gravitational field, which is also all these fields that we have on the planet. We are such delicate electromagnetic beings. And also, we're piezoelectric. Anybody ever gone to start a barbecue and you click the knob and it goes click and you get a little spark? That's piezoelectric. Well, our bones are piezoelectric. And so we're very, very, very electric. And we actually have more the characteristics of solid state, which is these kind of appliances are plugged in here, what they call solid state appliances. We are more aligned with that because we're actually quite crystalline in our structure. So I guess where I'd like to come to that, and this is my statement, is like, how can we be so arrogant to think that such a sensitive electromagnetic being or system would not be affected by very, very sensitive by milliamps and microvolts. To me it defies logic. How can we not be affected by this stuff? And so I'm going to talk very, very quickly and briefly about some of the actual biological effects and how these affect people. Okay, the blood-brain barrier is around the blood vessels in the brain, and if this leaks, then toxins which aren't supposed to be in the brain leak out into the brain. And more than 40 years we've known that this happens, and how they found this out was that they put dye into the blood of some animals and they exposed them to microwave radiation, killed them, sectioned their brain, and the dye was actually in the brain where it shouldn't be. And so for a long time we've actually known this, and a guy, Dr. Leif Selford, who's one of the key researchers in this area, he found relatively recently that at signal strength of 1,000th to a 10,000th of a cell phone, equivalent of a cell phone, was the strongest cause for causing this to leak. So we're talking about incredibly low power densities causing this effect. Not the phone right at your ear, but a phone at almost 2 meters away is potentially more hazardous. So now we're talking about passive, you can talk about passive smoking, we're talking about passive cell phones, and to some degree about Wi-Fi. And so this is a cross-section of a normal brain. This is a rat's brain, they do it with rats, and And then with 2 hours exposure, all those little black dots are where albumin, which is something that's not supposed to get into the brain, leaks from the blood vessels into the brain with 2 hours exposure. So, and this is where the thought is that this is where a lot of the chronic health conditions that we're sort of seeing today are possibly coming from this. And if you'd like to see, there's a really, really good video on this, which is where I took those slides from, and electromagnetic fields and leakage of the blood-brain barrier on YouTube. Another thing that's been talked about is melatonin. And melatonin is absolutely critical. It's the strongest anti-cancer agent that we make. And they started doing some testing with melatonin a little while ago, and things like sleeping on an electric blanket, they found that it reduced the melatonin production by 25%, which is really significant. I don't know how many people sleep on an electric blanket, but I can tell you now, if you do, my recommendation is that you turn it off at the wall before you get into bed, because they're really, really bad for you. And they found a real distinct dose relationship. So the bigger the dose, the more the reduction. And in another study, they found that 25 minutes on a cell phone led to significant reduction. So this is one of the biggest cancer-fighting agents that we produce in our body, and microwave radiation is limiting this. Okay. Calcium efflux and influx. What calcium efflux is when the calcium ions escape from the cells, and particularly the neurons. And what happens then is that the neurons don't work properly. In other words, your brain doesn't work properly, and changes response time and behaviour. Very, very linked to Alzheimer's and other neurological diseases. And this is something that's really coming on. It's like Alzheimer's and neurological diseases. We're seeing them come in a lot younger populations and a lot more. And there's a lot of concern that this is possibly one of the effects. And also, if there's calcium ion influx, that stops apoptosis, which is actually the killing of cells that need to die, that are supposed to die, and it allows damaged cells to survive a lot longer. So, okay, stress response. This is another effect that we're having in the body, and I'll just come through this pretty quickly. But we create stress proteins or heat shock proteins when we're exposed to this stuff, and everybody does. Some people cope with it better than others, but one of the key things that they've found is that this is cumulative over lifetime. And so my real concern is for the unborn child, for the babies and children, and for the young kids that are at our schools at the moment. This is where the young kids now are going to have an incredible lifetime exposure of the stuff. I'm almost 56, and it's been 20 odd years since I've been exposed to this stuff. So, and it's later on in my life. But for young children, their cells are dividing rapidly as they're growing, and their lifetime exposure is going to be really extreme to this stuff. And it creates a reduction in the ability to actually respond to the stresses after a while. So, and this is where we become more susceptible. Cell membranes. We're almost through this, by the way. It's not too much more of this. I know I wanted to try and convey, what the science is actually seeing and what the effects actually are in the body. And at the cell membrane, these unnatural frequencies cause the cell membranes to shut down. And after a time, the cell learns that that's normal to have the cell membrane shut down. So what does that mean? It means that the build-up of the free radicals or waste inside the cell can't come out, and the nutrients can't go in. And so you're talking about cellular energy being dropped by 60%, and this is where maybe chronic fatigue syndrome and things like this. This is where, right at the absolute cellular level, this stuff is really affecting us very badly. And it's not just microwave radiation, it's also magnetic fields and electric fields that do this as well. And this creates structural changes, which then go into functional changes, which then lead on to cascading down to basically whatever weakness you have in your system may be the thing that comes out and bites you. And this is really probably one of the most valid explanations for why a single effect on the body can have such a massive effect as far as symptoms go. You know, we saw those 121 recognised symptoms. Well, this kind of explains how that can be, because in a lot of the science they say, well, how can it be that just one cause causes all these different things? Well, this damage to the cell membrane actually answers that. This is how it happens. And just the very last thing, everybody talks about DNA, and I thought, well, when I was doing a little bit of research on it, I found some really, really interesting statistics and facts about DNA, which I thought would be interesting to share. DNA, it's a very, very efficient conductor of electricity, and it's what they're actually using in nanotechnology and molecular electronics to build these new structures that they're coming up with. But DNA is 6 foot long. Can you imagine that? Your one strand of DNA is actually 6 foot long within a cell. And it's a coiled coil. It's all coiled up inside the cell. And this becomes, it's what they call a fractal antenna, which means that it's very, very good at picking up radio frequency signals. And DNA is a lot more sensitive to EMF and EMR than other molecules, proteins. And every time a cell divides, there's something like 120,000 mistakes in the DNA, but our bodies, the systems come in and clean all this up and tidy it up. And it's possibly one of the things is that if that repair mechanism is disrupted, maybe that's where we're sort of seeing DNA issues. And as we said before, with young children who have got far more cell reproduction and cell growth, this is where they're more susceptible to this DNA damage. Just some stuff about the studies that have come through. DNA breaks at 100 milligauss. So 100 milligauss is a magnetic field, not a microwave. But if you've got a clock radio sitting on your bedside, you'll get between 100 and 200 milligauss at that clock radio. Okay, so we're talking about common household fields. It's unusual to get that kind of field in most places around the house, and from the building biology guidelines that I operate, we're looking for less than 1 milligauss as being an acceptable level in a house. But there are appliances where you'll measure 100 milligauss. There's a large number of scientists, Dr. George Carlo is one of them, who's found these genotoxic exposures. And human sperm, this study in 2012 was really interesting. It was one of the very first studies that I don't think it was one of the first, but it was it was very, very well publicised at the time. What they found was that using a laptop, the equivalent of having a laptop in the lap, created a significant reduction in the quality and quantity of the sperm. And so, so that's kind of wrapping up all of the kind of effects at that kind of level. But this is all of the diseases or conditions that electropollution is fairly widely implicated in. And again, it's, as I said before, it's a very, very broad spread of issues. Anything from chronic fatigue to MS. I know a guy in Sydney who had MS very, very badly. He was on canes, could hardly walk, and it wasn't microwave radiation, but it was dirty electricity that was affecting him. And he found out about these filters for cleaning up dirty electricity. He plugged some of these in, and within a few months, he was almost walking normally. And if you met this guy today, you wouldn't believe that he actually had MS. He holds down a regular job. The only thing is that if he gets exposed to too much dirty electricity or a bit of microwave radiation, his feet drag a little bit. But apart from that, there's nothing that you would recognise that this guy had MS. And he actually has the brain scans to show the plaques when it was full on, and about 6 months or a year later, another brain scan, most of the plaques were actually gone. And the neurologist couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that something like that, and they basically didn't really want to know because it was outside their paradigm. Okay, so we're going to look at some case studies. The first one is in Brazil, and it's a study of 856 cell phone towers and over a 10-year period, 96 to 2006. And what they did is they looked at the deaths by cancer, and they had almost 7,200 people, and what they did was they looked at where the person was living when they were diagnosed with cancer, and they put that onto a map. And then they mapped where all the cell phone towers were. And then they looked at the relationship between where the cell phone towers were and where the people were. And the big bullseye graph that you see there, the red bullseye in the middle, is 100 metres out from the cell phone tower. Half of the people diagnosed with cancer lived within 100 metres of a cell phone tower. And 80% were less than 500 metres from a cell phone tower. So, you know, and there are a number of studies, epidemiological studies like this, looking at proximity to cell phone towers. There was another one, Nyla, was a village in either Germany or Austria. Again, a similar kind of study there. There's also been studies in Israel and other places. So, who knows what that is? Who's got one? Okay, I'm going to give you an interesting statistic. At 2 metres distance, this phone is equivalent to being 100 to 200 metres from a cell phone tower. And at 1 metre away from it, it's more like 50 metres away from a cell phone tower. Actually, this evening, we just before this, we went somewhere, and where there was a cordless phone there, and I got about 1.5 metres away from it, and my meter went off scale at just over 20,000 microwatts. That was per square metre. And when we look at the very bottom line on the right hand side, that was the measurement range that they were measuring at the person's place who was diagnosed with cancer, so between 8,000 and 31,000 microwatts. Okay, so at 1 metre or 1.5 metres away from a cordless phone, I'll very regularly measure 20,000 microwatts, quite often. Same distance from a Wi-Fi router is probably more like 10 to 14,000 microwatts, not quite so strong. Cordless phones are very, very strong. I really don't recommend you have them. Well, hopefully you can see this. The meter that I have actually is quite a clever piece of kit, and I can combine it with a GPS tracker and a data logger. And I don't know if you can see, but where it says Remuera down the bottom, that's when I'm driving along Remuera Road, and the height of the spikes is the strength of the signal from the cell phone towers. And so as you drive along, you can see there's nothing, then you get very big spikes, nothing, big spikes, and this is as I've driven along past the cell phone towers. And right out to the right is closer to where I live in St Heliers, and one of those big spikes is a set of shops, and there's a Montessori preschool right underneath there, and it's just like really not good. But surprisingly enough, some of the strongest ones were actually along the waterfront. But it's not until you can actually see or hear what this stuff is like that you actually start to get an idea of what's actually surrounding us. And again, I think it's really important to try and understand what's around us. The birds and the bees. In America in particular, they're finding really, really big problems with migratory birds. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what's sort of happening in the world a little bit. And I think it's the Department of Fish and Wildlife in America is actually, they are pushing the American government harder than just about anybody to try and stop having cell phone towers, and also along high voltage power lines. They have, all the birds get confused with the fields, and they fly and they get thousands and thousands and thousands of birds killed every year from this. It's quite a recognised thing. Bees, the colony collapse disorder. Yes, pesticides are quite a big thing, but also microwave radiation really, really affects bees badly. There was one test where they put some cordless phone bases in some hives and not in others, and in the hives that had the cell phone bases in them, most of the bees didn't come back, and in one hive none of the bees came back, and it's because the navigation ability of the bee is completely confused by the microwave radiation. And also we're getting damage to trees and plants. And if you'd like to see something, a really, really good movie about this, and you can watch it on YouTube, it's a free movie, Resonance Beings of Frequency. Really recommend it. It's a very, very good movie. And hopefully you can kind of see what this is. This is an American smart meter, but it's plant's growing on a wall, and you can see how reluctant that plant is to grow near that smart meter. It just doesn't really want to. Well, hopefully you can see that. Okay, we're just going to talk about children now. Let's talk more about what's happening to our kids. Now, autism, I'm just going to take this as one example, but really what I'm talking here about is chronic health issues. And so as one example, autism. 1970 in America, autism was 1 in 10,000 in American children. And you can see the change over the years. This is study publication dates. In 2013, it was 1 in 50. And they're predicting that it's going to get worse. What could possibly be causing this? You know, what's changed in the world? A lot of people talk about vaccinations, but you know, there were vaccinations in 85, 95, 2001. Personally, I think vaccinations aren't great, and I think that they do cause some harm. And there's also been a significant increase in chemicals, but I personally believe that the increase in microwave radiation has been a huge impact in this. And we'll talk a little bit about what possibly has caused this to happen. So one bit of research I was reading was talking about paternal DNA damage, and that up to 80% of autism is passed on from the male gene. And then the question goes, well, okay, how does that happen? And they came up with this theory of older fathers, but they did some research on that. It's like, no, older fathers, that doesn't really cut it. That's not going to explain what's happening here. That's not going to explain what's wrong with the swimmers. Then, is it an underreporting issue or some mysterious environmental cloud? No, not that. And then you'd expect that if it was going to be, you know, if this was affecting the children and it was something to do with DNA damage or something to do with microwave radiation, there might be some other effects that they've seen. And in one study between 1995 and 2010, they found that mental health disorders doubled in young children, but only 6%, less than 6% increase in adults. So there's definitely something affecting our children badly. Okay, and so then as they looked at how autism developed in America, it was renowned as being an affluent person's disease. And so the affluent states in America got far more autism cases. And then they looked at the poor states and they thought, well, okay, it can't be chemicals, because often the poor states have a lot more industry and a lot more chemicals in them, so maybe it's not that. And so then, well, okay, what can it be? And they then looked at the uptake of cell phones. And what they found was that in the wealthier areas or the wealthier states, the uptake of cell phones was far earlier on with wealthier people, of course. And then, so it was the affluent areas that had cell phones first. And so what is this, you know, why is that important? Okay, so we have a lot of studies linking damage to sperm to cell phones. French study from 1985 to 2005. This is just an overall, not specifically to do with cell phones, but we're seeing a worldwide trend that there's a decrease in sperm and a decrease in sperm viability. And so, you know, 32% decrease in concentration and 34% decrease in normal sperm. And this is, you know, just in one country. There are lots of studies, and I think it's quite well known that there's an issue with this worldwide. And even slight DNA damage can have possible lifetime effects to a child. You know, and it might just be a social or mental health problem of a lesser order than autism. And one comment in there was social instability in public schools and across society, and it's like, well, you know, are we seeing that kind of stuff? Maybe. And then looking at, okay, what could possibly be causing this? So if we look at the two male and female reproductive organs, on a woman the eggs are far better protected. They're behind dense layers of tissue, and women are far less likely to carry a cell phone in their pocket. But they will carry them in their bra, and please, if you ever see anybody carrying a cell phone in your bra, please ask them not to. It's very, very, very dangerous. But men's reproductive organs get at least 16 times more exposure, especially if the cell phone's in the front pocket. So could it be something as absolutely simple as guys carrying cell phones that have caused this massive increase in chronic health with our children? Possibly. Possibly. And the recommendation on this, I think I had a link on the website there, but the recommendation on that website was that if any couple were looking to conceive, they recommended that for a minimum of 30 days to avoid cell phones in pockets, minimum 30 days, so to try and have a healthy child. Okay, so electrosensitivity, and this is a new condition which is being born out of this our electro age, and it's something that's not recognised by the doctors here, but is becoming recognised in some places, and it's a condition that people become, after exposure to Wi-Fi or electric fields, become very, very, very sensitive. And I get phone calls regularly. Today was an example. I had a guy ring me up. He was, I'm guessing from his voice, he would have been in his 50s, and he started talking to me about how he's in the last 2 or 3 months, all of a sudden, he's becoming incredibly sensitive to anything that's transmits. Even when I talked to him a little bit more, it turned out that he had realised that it was actually from the time that the smart meter was installed in his house, and the transmissions from the smart meter were affecting him. And what's happened is he's become sensitive to everything. If he goes into town, he lives in a small rural town, but if he goes into town, the Wi-Fi from the shops, the cell phone towers, he can't cope with it. He said what was his symptoms? He was saying that he gets like a mental fog, or he gets, it messes with his ability to balance, it messes up with his balance and everything. So it's really starting to affect him badly. And all I could say to him was, look, I'm really sorry about this, but you're going to have to be incredibly careful for the rest of your life, and you're going to actually have to get rid of all of these transmitting things, because it's going to affect you really badly. In Sweden, it's recognised as a disability, and they have about 3% of the population who are actually on a disability allowance for this. So in New Zealand, we're talking about 125,000, 140,000 people who are potentially highly electrosensitive. And I'm hearing about and in touch with people, a lot of people are electrosensitive, and it is growing. It's also recognised in Spain, a little bit in Canada and the USA, and they're trying to get it recognised in the EU. And it can be caused by chronic exposure, so long-term slow exposure, or if a very short-term high exposure. And this is where smart meters are a little bit dangerous, because the pulse from a smart meter is very, very strong, but just for a very, very brief period of time. And it seems to be a trigger for electropollution, or for electrosensitivity for people that have never ever been electrosensitive before. And often it's linked with people who also have chemical sensitivity. So if you're a little bit sensitive, you need to be really careful around this stuff, because you don't want to become electrosensitive. And in New Zealand, it's treated as a psychiatric condition. Okay, if you go to a doctor and with the symptoms of electrosensitivity, the first thing they do is they think you've got a psychiatric problem. And this is completely wrong, but that's the overriding opinion of the medical institution here, and I think this really needs to change. And these are the common symptoms. I'm not going to go through. You can read them quicker than I can say them. But what I do want to say about this is that if you have children or friends, anybody that starts talking about having symptoms like this, particularly children, you really, really need to sit up and take notice, because if they start talking about fatigue, insomnia, not sleeping well or waking up grotty, or if they're getting headaches and nausea or something like that, particularly if they say it's happening at school, you've really, really got to try and understand what's happening for them. But this is electrosensitivity to some degree, but it's also what children are reporting in schools around Wi-Fi. And so looking at how can we quantify, or how can we actually prove that there is such a thing as electrosensitivity? Well, there's a lady in Canada, Dr. Magda Havas. She's done some really interesting research, and if you do a YouTube search for her, there's a lot of really good videos she's put up there. But what this shows is the effect on the heartbeat in subject A there is no response. The DECT is a cordless phone, a decked cordless phone. So when they're exposed to a cordless phone, subject A, not reactive, but subject B, the moment that decked phone base was turned on, their heartbeat rocketed to 122 beats a minute. Turned off, came back again. Turn the cordless phone on, and again, heartbeat goes up. This is a person that's reactive. This would be a very, very electrosensitive person. Not all electrosensitive people react as quickly as that. Often it can take time. But this is sort of the kind of things that we're sort of seeing with electrosensitive people. And this is a chart on the right-hand side is less than 10 metres away from a cell phone tower and the list of symptoms. And as we come out, the bars closest to me are at greater than 300 metres from a cell phone tower. But these are the symptoms that people, again, those similar kind of symptoms that people are talking about. And the interesting thing, I guess, and the point that they're trying to make on the slide is how significant it is, but also these symptoms are associated with ageing or rapid ageing syndrome. So, fatigue, sleep disturbances, difficulty concentrating, depression, memory loss. This is all rapid ageing symptoms, and this is what people are getting from being around cell phone towers and Wi-Fi. Okay, now we're going to get to the real crux of it, Wi-Fi in schools. We've been building up to this bit, right? Okay, these are the issues that I think, and the very first issue, and I think this is the most critical one, is that there's no acceptance of risk. And we'll talk a little bit about, I'll actually do a bit of a critique of the very latest report that the Ministry of Education is kicking around at the moment, a little bit later on. And there are no scientific studies on children and Wi-Fi. There just aren't any. We have no idea what it does to children. Apart from we know that those biological effects I talk about, yep, we know that, but specifically with children, there is no studies. And often parents and teachers and students are not told what's happening. It's just like, here it comes, you're going to get it. And also, not consulted about how it's going to be installed or where it's going to be installed. No risk assessments. It's not like you go into the school and go, okay, we're going to work out, where are the risks. At my own son's school, they very, very kindly allowed me to go through with my meters and do some testing. And where I found very, very high levels, they actually turned down the access points, which was, I guess, a step in the right direction, but not really enough, I think. But at least they were relatively open to that. But there's no risk assessment that's sort of organised. And because there's no acceptance of risk, there's also no mechanism put in place to manage what these risks possibly could do. It's the whole medical establishment consider this to be a psychological problem. Okay, so and there's no training for teachers to recognise those symptoms that we talked about. I think it's really incredibly important that, especially early recognition of the symptoms, because if a kid's going for a long, long time complaining of headaches and not being able to concentrate, and his marks are suffering or whatever, that's really, really important. And this ambient EMR is not really regulated. There is, if you try and complain about having a cell phone tower placed that's going to go up in front of your house, you can't do it. The legislation specifically says that you're not allowed to complain about the stuff on the basis of health. It's just, you're not allowed to. It's just, that's in the Resource Management Act, you're not allowed to. No. The simple answer is no. There's a lot of things that you can buy. There's pendants and pyramids and all kinds of things. My personal feeling on that is that they don't actually protect you at all, because the word protection implies safety, and none of these things actually create safety. They may have some effect on the biofield. They may harmonise your body a little bit, possibly, but my experience is that it's never enough to actually counteract any of these effects and symptoms. Okay, and no freedom of choice as to whether they get exposed or not. And personally, I think all children have the right to a safe learning environment. And this is, I think, an interesting one, because like in some areas there is absolute hyper caution around children. You know, we don't let them walk to school anymore. You know, it's like, but in this particular area, they're just, I think it's because everybody loves their toys so much. The adults love the toys too much, and so it's like, no. But I think the adults need to really understand what's happening here. Okay, so this is the very latest report that's come out, February 2014, and this is the report that the Ministry of Education is basically putting out to say that, hey, this is completely safe. And literally, the press release behind this says it is totally safe. There is no reason for harm or concern, and there's no harm. Okay, so what do I think is wrong with this report? The guy that did the measurements didn't even have the right equipment to measure the 5.8 gigahertz band of the router. It was a dual band router, 2.45 gigahertz and 5.8. He didn't even have the gear to measure half of the signal. Yep, it's a company called EMF Services in Christchurch. And then he guesses, based on what the supplier of the equipment told him, that it might be about 10% more. I have got the gear to measure 5.8 gigahertz, and I did so recently in a school, and it was more than 10%, I'm sure. Okay, so straight away, you know, this is a little bit not too good. And then when within the body of the report, he doesn't attempt to add that on. It's like he focuses on the 2.45 gigahertz only, as if ignoring the other part. And there's one aspect where he's talking about peak readings in close proximity to a laptop. He doesn't say how far away from the laptop he is, and this is quite critical. The distance, the closer you are to the source, by far the stronger it is. And there's actually a photo, I'll show that later on. And also doesn't talk about what strength the access points are. The access points can be turned down, I believe, as low as 12% of full power. And so if you're in a school and they've just put these things in and they've put them on full volume, these are industrial version access points. They can be very strong. I know at my school, or my son's school, where we measure them, they'd turn them down to, I think, about 12% in areas. So they'd turn them right down, but we don't know whether the access points that he was measuring were high or low. We have no idea. Also talks predominantly about average readings, and what they do is, it's a very common thing that they average readings over 6 minutes, okay? And so, and my comment here is, when is the bullet going to hit? So if somebody fires a bullet at my heart, and if we take the millisecond that it's of where the impact is going to hit me, and we spread that impact over 6 minutes, the bullet's actually going to fall off. It's going to hit me and fall off, because the impact force averaged over 6 minutes will be diminished significantly. But what happens? The bullet goes right through me. This is, I think it's an absolute fallacy of how they actually do this, because what our body has to deal with is actually the peak. Our body has to deal with the peak output of the router, and so averaging over 6 minutes, I think, is just, I think somebody dreamt this up as a way to hide the truth, I think. But that's a recognised international thing to do, to average over 6 minutes. Okay? There's no recognition of biological effects whatsoever. And in a way, this report is actually correct. They say it is completely safe. And based on the government guidelines, the government guideline for microwave radiation is 10 million microwatts per square metre at this frequency range. Okay? When I do my testing in people's homes, I'm looking for less than 10 microwatts in a bedroom and less than 100 microwatts in a living area. And the New Zealand standard is 10 million microwatts. Okay? There's a real disconnect between what is safe and what the New Zealand standard is based on is what they call a thermal effect. And this is the only aspect of the standard that it's based upon. And so in other words, if it can't cook you or it doesn't burn you, it's totally safe. And so from that perspective, that report is actually correct. It won't burn you and it won't cook you, so it's safe. But we spent quite a lot of time talking about the actual biological effects. Okay? And the final thing is, like, who is going to be responsible when and if this is proven wrong? I mean, you know, the damage that's been done to our children in this environment. Who's going to take the responsibility for that? And this is probably a little bit hard to see, but this is a picture from that report showing the sensor for the instrument and the laptop. And this is it looks much further away than I would use. I think if you're talking about where a student is in relation to that laptop, you know, they'll be definitely less than a metre away, probably half a metre away. Sometimes the kids crowd right up to them. This looks to me, when you look at the picture, it looks like there's a minimum a metre away from that laptop. And so at that distance, you are going to record significantly lower readings. And these are two of the graphs that come out of that report. And another way that I believe they really fudge this to make it look like it's so insignificant, they talk about percentage of standard. And so on the left-hand one, the highest reading we get, and this is at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 metres away from an access point. This is as we move away from an access point. And the highest reading is 0.11% of the New Zealand standard, which is 11,000 microwatts per square metre. Okay? Remember we were talking about cordless phones being about 20,000 microwatts? And the lowest reading I got at about 6 metres away was 1,500 microwatts per square metre. That's probably relatively okay. I think it's probably a little bit low, but those are the kind of readings that I would expect to get at those kind of ranges. That's probably about right. But where they measured, and this is where showing that photo of the laptop, over here, the second one they're talking about somebody typing or not typing, and the measurement they took at the actual laptop itself, and they're talking about only 12,500 microwatts per square metre. And at that distance, which is probably a metre or a metre and a half away, that's probably about right too, but it's not what the person experiences. I think you would be getting, I typically measure at about a metre away, or at about this distance away from a laptop, which is about where your face is going to be. I would regularly measure more than 20,000 microwatts at that distance. And so the critical thing is, where is the most danger is the highest reading is always at the device that's closest to you. So it's the laptop or it's the tablet. It's not necessarily the access point is the problem. Yep, you can get long-term chronic exposure from an access point, but it's actually the laptop or the thing that's in your lap or that's nearest to you is the problem. And as I say, I often measure over 20,000 microwatts at the user. And that's roughly equivalent to 50 metres from a cell phone tower. Okay? And the other thing I think you need to understand also is that if you have 10 kids, all connected wirelessly, all using a laptop, you've got to measure one and then add it all together. So potentially you might have, let's jump on. Potentially you could have 200,000 microwatts in around a group of children, significantly stronger. And this is talking about where the antenna locations are and this is SARS specific absorption rate, and talking about the heating effect in the body, and we talked a little bit about that thermal effect before. And as you can see on the left-hand laptop at the top, where the antenna is, the Wi-Fi antenna is, it's a lot hotter on the body, and on the far one on the right, where the antenna is up higher on the top of the screen, it's further away from the body, so it's not heating quite as much. But where are the antennas on a laptop? And there's not just one of them. This one's got 4. Some of them are quite close, some of them are really high. And the other thing, just talking about laptops, when you're using a laptop, we were talking about magnetic fields. When you've got your fingers on the keys of a laptop, you'll be quite typically getting up to 10 to 12 milligauss of magnetic field, and we're looking at as 1 milligauss as being okay. So a keyboard of a laptop is actually also very, very strong for magnetic fields. So it's another area for caution. iPads. This is an iPad 4. There are 4 antennas on an iPad 4 right where you hold them. And again, it's I was measuring a house one day and we'd turned off all the Wi-Fi, we'd turned off all the cordless phones, and I was measuring in the lounge, and all of a sudden I'd just get this big spike on my meter. And I was like, where was that coming from? I thought it was a smart meter, so I went outside. No, they didn't have a smart meter. And kept walking around. It was about every 3 or 4 minutes. I finally found that there was an iPad on charge. It was turned off and on charge, tucked around the corner of the sofa. So I set the meter next to it, and about every 4 minutes we'd get a spike, and it was about 20,000 microwatts. And this is just, it's not connected to the Wi-Fi, it's just on charge. And so legislation, and Joey sort of talked a bit about this, so I'll kind of zing through this fairly quickly. But In 2006, electric and magnetic fields were classified as a carcinogen. 2011, microwave radiation. And the one thing I wanted to say was that it was a unanimous vote of about 32 people, doctors and scientists. One person abstained, but the research it was based on was by Dr. Leonard Waddell, was the main person's research, and he now is saying that it should be a class 1 carcinogen, and that they want to go back and at a minimum get it taken up to a class 2A carcinogen, a probable carcinogen. Okay, but what's happening at the moment, and we actually saw this in the Herald a couple of days ago, the industry is starting a PR campaign to try and convince us all that the 2B classification should actually be dropped. Okay, and we had this thing in the Herald about how cell phones are totally safe a couple of days ago. A few days before that, there was another press release or another article like that in one of the English newspapers, and there's been a few of them scattered. It's just starting, where they're calling for the end to all research because we now know it's completely safe. And I think this would be really dangerous. Russia, China and Italy have standards 100 times lower than us, and Switzerland, Ukraine even lower. The Bio-Initiative report, and if you've never heard of the Bio-Initiative report, I really highly recommend you download it and read it. It's freely available. It's an incredible document. It's about this thick. But I haven't read all of it myself, but skim through it and read it. It's very good, but they are recommending 1,000 microwatts per square metre maximum. Okay? And building biology, which is what I work with, between 10 and 1,000 microwatts is considered severe exposure. Greater than 1,000 microwatts per square metre is extreme exposure. And in nature, our exposure just like 300 years ago was 0.000001 microwatts per square metre. We have this massive increase in this stuff. And as we said, the Ministry of Education has just published a document saying it's totally safe. And Joey sort of touched on this, so again I'll go through this pretty quick, but in France there is legislation going through the Parliament, and one of the key things is that the teachers will be allowed or have the ability to turn routers off by legislation, and also stopping it from childcare. In Israel, it's banned up to grade 3, and there's currently a really interesting court case about electro-sensitivity in children going through the Israeli courts, and that is due to sort of come to a head in a few months' time, which should be quite interesting. Switzerland is an interesting country, but I think the main thing is that for more than 10 years, the national carrier Swisscom have been installing wired networks in schools. And I read a rebuttal or a comment from, I think it was the Minister for Education, saying that she had looked into these claims about Switzerland and that they were putting in wireless systems. Well, yeah, they are, but of the 6,800 schools, it's estimated that fewer than 100 have actually put in Wi-Fi. And this is probably from a year or two ago. It may be more now, but that was certainly the overriding trend for wired. Germany, Joey talked a little bit about that, Bavaria and Frankfurt. In Australia, this is on the negative side. A few days ago, Telstra announced that they'll spend $100 million installing 2 million Wi-Fi hotspots, including 8,000 in public places. And we're also seeing this here as well. Telecom have put Wi-Fi hotspots on a lot of their phone boxes. Russians are way more ahead of the West in this stuff. They've done a lot more research. And there was an advisory that came out a couple of years ago where children under 16, pregnant women, people who are epileptic and with memory loss, sleep disorders and neurological diseases were recommended to not use cell phones at all. And this is a government thing. And New Zealand, our government is just about to kick off on a rural Wi-Fi initiative that will see just about every habitable inch of New Zealand hit with Wi-Fi. It's been done in conjunction with Vodafone. I think it's not that far away from happening. And they seem to be frantically pushing Wi-Fi into schools. Our children. What's happening to our kids? And this is a survey of young people, not exactly children, but this is the level of interaction that young people are having with digital devices. It's 75% take their phones to bed. I mean, don't ever let children take phones or wireless devices to bed. And some children and teens are even more active on this stuff. And if we look at what's going to happen in the schools, if over a 10-year period, if your kid is exposed to Wi-Fi for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 4 terms a year, that's roughly 12,000 hours of Wi-Fi over that period of time. And in the Interphone study, which is one of the studies that's absolutely bagged by everybody, but one of the things that came out of it, and this was Waddell's research came out of this, was that he very clearly demonstrated that over 1,640 hours of cell phone use over a 10-year period, there was a 40% increase in risk of glioma. Okay, and that's equivalent to 27 minutes on a cell phone a day. Okay, it's not in today's world. That's not that much. And children absorb an awful lot more of this, up to 2 times more. And there's been a lot of diagrams like this kicking around, but you can basically see that on a 5-year-old, the skull thickness is a lot less, and the penetration into the skull is significantly more. 10-year-old, not so much. Adult, a lot less. Okay, so in our digital environment, what are the effects that are happening to our children? So there's quite a bit of research that it's negatively affecting on brain growth. And this is where children are being focused on tablets and things like this. They're not socialising, they're not using their motor skills there, and I think this is something that's going to be quite serious. Delayed development, where they're just focusing on singular things. Mental illness, and there's quite a lot of research you can see there about the effects on children as far as mental illness goes. Obesity, children not being active. I can remember when I was a wee nipper, I mean, on a Saturday, would say, "See you later, Mum," in the morning, and it'd be after dark before we walked in the door again often. Just like not happening. Sleep deprivation, and children aren't sleeping as well. I mean, all of us in general, and as a general population, we're not sleeping as well. Aggression, and this is linked to, I think, more to violent games and things like that, but just the kind of media that the kids get access to on the internet. Digital dementia, and it's a real thing, and addictions. Children, people are getting absolutely addicted to this technology. And again, 1 in 11 children aged 8 to 18 addicted to technology. I think it was actually more about addictions that this Korean study was about. But I think it was 1 in 4 children were addicted to their cell phone, and when they took the phone away, they showed all the signs of a real addiction to a substance. So I don't know if anybody can relate to that. This was one study on digital addiction, and the kids themselves actually describe themselves as being addicted, and they consider that the devices were a real extension of themselves, and that they felt completely lost and alone when the devices were taken away. I mean, does that resonate with any parents? And had absolutely no idea what to do. There was none of the creative play. It's just, and that was where the reference is from. Okay, so what can we do about it? So I've given a lot of information, and most of it not very good. So what can we do about it? Well, the first thing is to become well informed, understand the risks and the issues, and I really encourage you to do some more research and reading after this. Set limits for the kids and keep them both at home and at school. Advocate the precautionary principle, and this is basically that if there is enough doubt, then don't do it, even if there isn't full scientific proof. And the other part of the precautionary principle actually puts the responsibility onto the person creating the effect. So the responsibility really should go to the schools, the government, everything, to really take more care and look after our children and ourselves. ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable. And this is where, at my own son's school, at least they allowed me to go in and measure the access points, and they would allow them to be turned down if they're really high. So at a minimum, get the stuff as low as you possibly can. Wired solutions are always the best option. Turn off the Wi-Fi when not in use, and that includes the actual devices, the laptops and the tablets as well. Put them in airplane mode, turn off the Wi-Fi on the laptops. And this is something that the teachers should be encouraged to do all the time, is to turn off the access points if they're not needed. And turn down the access points as well, I mentioned that. Educate teachers and children on how to recognise those adverse effects. And none of these devices should ever be used on the lap, ever. The magnetic fields are very high, and the microwave radiation. And maybe they could have separate areas for when they're using digital technology and when they're not. And again, we need to devise some strategies for electrosensitive kids and people. And at home, and this is what I've done at my home, is that we don't have anything that's wireless. I'm not against technology at all. I've got about half a dozen computers at home throughout the house. They're all connected by cable. There's no wireless computers. And things like wireless baby monitors, of any parents here with young kids or grandparents, please do not let wireless baby monitors be put near babies or young children. They're incredibly harmful to them. You need to turn off the Wi-Fi at the router and at the device, the laptop or the iPad. And it's not just a matter of plugging in the cable. I regularly go to people's homes and they go, "Oh, I'm good. I've got a cable from the router to the laptop, and I measure the router and it's going flat out. I measure the laptop and it's going flat out. So we've got to turn off the router, turn off the laptop." It's not just a matter of plugging in the cables. Practice safe cell phone use, and I mean I could talk for ages on that, but on my website, safespace.net.nz, on the links page, at the very top of the page is a really good 3-page info sheet you can download. There's lots and lots of good information on there. Laptops and tablets not on the lap. Bluetooth devices are, especially the ones, the earpieces, they're just as bad as pretty much as holding a cell phone to your head. An air tube headset is significantly better. And at home, if you've got a microwave, I recommend you don't use them at all. They denature the food. But if you do use a microwave, it's not good enough to just step away from it. It's not even good enough to go out of the kitchen. You need to go to the other end of the house. And I regularly demonstrate this to people. You really need to get a long distance away from them to be even slightly safe. And smart meters, get the transmitting modem removed from your smart meter. And stopsmartmeters.org.nz, really good website, lots of information. Now, specifically for the people that live in this area, I just heard something the other day which I'd like to pass on to you about your smart meters. The ones that you guys are getting here not only connect to the Vodafone network on 923 megahertz, but I believe that the ones that are being installed here also have the Zigbee modems in them, and this is a 2.45 gigahertz Wi-Fi modem. And it's in place so that when you get smart appliances, the smart appliances can talk to your smart meter, and your smart meter can control your smart appliances. So it can turn off your air conditioning maybe if too many people are using air conditioning. So I really strongly recommend that you understand, do some more research about smart meters, understand what the problems are, and fight against it. Try and make sure, try and get the transmitting modems taken out. If you've already got a smart meter, insist that the transmitting modems be taken out. If you don't have a smart meter, resist having one put in. You're talking about the little red light, or? Yeah, it's a microwave transmission. It's only about 4 or 5 milliseconds. It's very brief, but it's very strong. It's like a cell phone. It's like part of a cell phone. It just unplugs and they take it out. Yep, and that's wonderful because it keeps somebody in a job. Yeah. It's just a meter. Then it just becomes an electronic meter. Yeah. Okay, so research. Again, Joey touched on this. So I'll go through it fairly quickly. I was talking to a scientist in America the other day. He said it's now 18,000 studies. Okay, and we're almost there, folks. Not too much longer. Okay. I know it's been a lot, but at least 6,000 studies are showing that there's more than 122 biological effects. But the government uses this argument, the weight of evidence. If you ever hear a government person or somebody from the industry talking about the weight of evidence doesn't indicate that there's a problem. Well, the weight of evidence is building. It really is. And we'll talk a little bit about the quality of studies. I mentioned the Bio-Initiative report. There's really, when you start looking at the statistical number of studies that are coming out, especially the very recent ones, this was updated by Dr. David Carpenter for 2014, we're actually seeing very, very big percentages now of studies that are actually showing significant issues. So our government has got to start recognising that there is actually a problem here. Tainted research. Most of the research is actually done by the industry. It's all industry funded, almost exclusively, and absolutely it is. Overseas, most of the research is industry funded. And okay, overseas, where most of the standards come from, and the industry uses a product defence strategy, and this was initiated by Helen Knowlton, a PR agency in the 1920s, to help the cigarette tobacco industry last from 1920 right through the 1990s. And so all they have to do is create doubt, a little bit of doubt about some research or some issue, and that's what they use to stall and put off any change. Okay? And there are a number of scientific agencies, PR agencies, scientific agencies that are hired to basically discredit good research. There's a huge number of independent researchers, George Carlo, Ollie Johansson, Andrew Goldsworthy, Darius Lazinski. These guys have all found really significant things, and in all of these cases, they've tried to discredit them heavily. Their funding has been taken away. They've been accused with all kinds of things, and in virtually all of those instances, these guys have been removed from their positions. And again, our standards are only to do with thermal effect. And there's a very, very new movie that's just come out, and I really highly recommend this movie. It goes into how that 2B carcinogen ruling was done at the IARC. It actually shows documented evidence of how the industry and the WHO tried to influence it from not being passed as a Class 2B carcinogen. But beyond that, it's an incredibly, incredibly good video. It's one of the best I've ever seen, so highly recommend it. And this is compiled by Professor Henry Lai, who's one of the top researchers in DNA. And this is where he quotes that non-industry studies show 30% of those studies show no effect, 70% show harmful effect, and industry-funded studies, 68% no effect, 32% harmful effect. And this is what we're talking about industry-funded studies. Okay, I'm a bit of a car nut, so just to finish off here, I thought, how can we make this a little bit relatable about what the risk is and what's happening? And if you look at that car, it's from about the 1910s, somewhere around about there. And if you look at it, there's some attempt at mitigating some risk. There's a bit of a windscreen there, but it's not really that great. There's no windscreen wipers. The horn is just a squeezy bulb horn. The lights wouldn't shine on anything. They're probably carbide. And so, but that car would actually go quite fast. And there's no front brakes. And if it hit something, it would do significant damage, both to the person and what it hit. It's big and heavy. And I think that's the state of the research in the industry at the moment. We're doing this stuff because we can, and we're going hell for leather to make it go faster and better, and you know, just whatever we can do to take the technology ahead. And let's compare that to a modern car. Okay, we now accept that there is risk, and we have crumple zones, and we have airbags, and we have all this stuff to make the risk. We accept the risk, and we're trying to make it safer. That's where I think we need to go with this stuff. Once we recognise there is risk, the scientists will actually start trying to find ways to make this safer and more acceptable. I'm not into saying we've got to get rid of all this stuff. What I am saying is that we've got to accept that there is risk, and that once we get these very, very clever people onto it, I think that they can make it a lot safer. These are good books. Oh, sorry, I'll go back one. These are really, really good books. The last two, the two down the bottom, Overpowered and An Electronic Silent Spring, are both published this year. If you want to read something interesting about this from, I think, a very, very good perspective, Dr. Martin Blank is one of the authors of the Bioinitiative report. Incredibly good book. And I only finished the Electronic Silent Spring about 3 or 4 days ago, and amazing, amazing book. So if you do want to read a little bit more about it, that's it. The Force talks about how to be a little bit safer, and also duty electricity and electromagnetic radiation. That one also talks a little bit about how to be safer. And movies. If you're not into reading and you like watching movies, Resonance, Beings of Frequency, you can watch on YouTube. Take Back Your Power is about smart meters, and Microwave Science and Lies. All of those 3 movies are really, really well worth watching. So I'll leave that up if anybody wants to make any notes. Those are some of the references I've used for this talk, and we're kind of at the end, and so questions, if there are any.